on a Tuesday evening to come to the Community Wellbeing Show to talk about the fact or fictions about 5G. There's been a lot of misnomers, a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of misinformation out there, and then as a Community Wellbeing Show, it is our responsibility to make sure we address that head on and realize the benefits, of many positive benefits of 5G as well, and which we have talked about. So, you know, again, I urge those of you that are sort of watching, please, you know, dial into the studios 01216829735, and you can speak to Ninder in person. Alternatively, you can also type in and we can pass your comments on. So we spent the first half an hour talking about the benefits and some of those individuals that are believing in these conspiracy theories, getting two and two to make four, and really causing a panic, and that's the last thing anyone wants. I'm going to sort of move the conversation on now, and we know that Huawei, which is a Chinese company that is supplemented in terms of money by the Chinese government, and they were given the contract. And one of the reasons, and this was a open tender bid, whereby other companies such as Ericsson, Vodafone, EE were all asked to also be part of that bid. And in terms of the one that had the know-how, had the technology, in terms of cost, Huawei won the tender hands down. And that was a couple of years ago now, but obviously the international politics has changed, and I think that has had an impact on Huawei. So I'm now going to ask probably Ninder sort of go slightly out of his scope, really. So, and say, look, from my point of view, we know Donald Trump, USA, and now more recently with China taking these steps with Hong Kong now, that obviously has lost its favor with UK and also with America. Has some of those international pressure and steps have now come back to haunt China in its bum with regards to Huawei?
Okay, so I think you have to put in the context of global trade. So for the last year or so, we've seen simmering tension between China and America with the trade wars. You've seen that. So America has accused China of not understanding IP, intellectual property. It's accused China of not letting American businesses set up.
Sure.
It's accused China of manipulating the currency, so it's more competitive. It's also realized too late that over 20 years, China's become a massive economic force.
Yeah, global power.
China understands its major economic force and is starting to put that pressure on. How do we know that? They had an outbreak with India.
Recently,
India banned TikTok and has banned a few other Chinese apps. They've had a problem with their Muslim minority.
Uyghur Muslims, yeah.
That's raised quite an eyebrow.
Yeah.
They've had issues with Hong Kong.
Yes.
That's raised an eyebrow. 20 years ago, the number one enemy for the Western world was Russia. But what Russia didn't have, which China has, China dominates 13 to 15% of world trade. China's products are in people's houses.
Absolutely.
And that's suddenly America's woken up and realized. And COVID did a lot, because if you remember in the early days of COVID, when China was in lockdown, manufacturers here and suppliers and distributors weren't getting their stock from China.
Absolutely.
And there were shortages everywhere. And that's when the government here started to realize that actually us deindustrializing for 30 years, in other words, becoming a services company rather than a manufacturing economy, meant that we'd outsourced our manufacturing, and in the first blip we had, COVID in China, suddenly we weren't getting products. And then once COVID came into operation, we were struggling around PPE, because they were made in China. And then suddenly all of the other countries were also approaching China, so there was a supply shortage. Trump has got an election coming up in November. He's thinking, my only way of winning this is to become anti-Chinese. He calls it the Chinese virus.
That's right, it does, that's right.
He calls it the Chinese virus. Then, in order to put pressure on the rest of the countries, he's now put sanctions in and said Huawei can't use components from America.
Sure.
Which then makes their whole supply chain more opaque and less transparent. You don't know what's going on. That raises the risk. So anybody who's buying, a government who's buying Chinese products, suddenly can't understand or rely on this supply chain because of the sanctions. America's been clever in play using its economic power to put pressure on people like the UK. So in January, the government here said we are going with Huawei January. A lot happened between January and March, and a lot's happened between March and July. And when you put the jostling of two economic powers, then there's a political dimension, there's a technological dimension, and there's a cultural dimension, and obviously a business dimension.
I think you've done a remarkable job there, Ninder, even if I say so myself, in trying to put the world sort of dynamics into what happened and where did that leave us. So I fully concur with exactly what you're saying, and you've done a great synopsis there.
The problem,
yes,
problem is going forward. So TikTok, we're due to open a 3,000 people office in the UK.
Oh, wow.
They've stopped that. So now what we're finding is China is retaliating. So if we're banning Huawei, Jaguar Land Rover, 50% of their sales are in China.
Oh, wow.
So could China say to Jaguar Land Rover, we're banning you? And everybody else who exports, now let's take Apple. Apple phones, quite a bit of stuff gets done in China.
Absolutely.
So where does that sit? Apple phones have sensors in there, and you could argue the Chinese could say, well, hold on. If you think our phones are dodgy, your phones could be dodgy. So suddenly does Apple come into play? Where does that leave Apple? Where does it leave Apple and all the apps that operate in Hong Kong? Because now suddenly they're caught in the middle.
Absolutely.
HSBC are now going to be caught between the UK and China. Where do they now go? So this has opened up
a real can of worms.
A can of worms, and now suddenly, rather than being a problem between Trump and the Chinese, we've now got a whole dimension. Now, the people who haven't yet decided, so I think it's about 100 countries who still haven't decided. I tell you who they're waiting for. They're waiting for Germany.
Oh,
if Germany also decide to ban Huawei, that opens up everything. That opens up the whole relationship between the EU and China. China's already had a bit of a beef with Australia because Australia didn't like what they were doing. So this is opened up a whole can of worms, and now suddenly you're asking, and of course what we did realise for the last few years, the last few months really, more so, is that most countries have become what we call nationalistic. They look after their own interests. And now this is being played out on the global platform now. We're all seeing everybody jostling to protect themselves, because what COVID did was it exposed your reliance on trade. And it said, well, hold on, we're not as self-reliant as we used to be. Now, should we be producing our own PPEs? And of course, what we then also heard recently, the Russians hacked into British to understand how the vaccine was working. So suddenly everybody's running around trying to produce their own vaccines and hacking this and that. So what you do get a sense of, which is what's different from the 2008 recession, in 2008 all the leaders came together and resolved the banking crisis. Now with COVID, everybody's running off and doing their own thing, trying to produce their own vaccine, trying to shore up their own economies. And in the EU, we've had a battle internally between some countries who said don't give loans to the southern countries in the EU, and the southern countries saying you need to bail us out, you should give us a grant. People like Sweden and Norway saying no, we're going to give you a loan. So you're seeing splinters within the EU. So this is an extraordinary situation we find ourselves in.
And also, you know, China isn't what it used to be 20 years ago. It's not shy and retired company that's up and coming. It's there. You know, it is looking Donald Trump, USA, in the eye and giving a like for like, tit for tat sort of response. And just to give you one example, I know Donald Trump is very much inclusive about, America first. Gilead, one of the big pharma companies, produced something like, 17 billion worth of vaccines, and, which was enough for a few countries. But what did they do? They just gobbled it up, and they said, look, that's just for Americans. The rest of the world were thinking, oh, where does that leave us? So, I fully agree with what you're saying. Now, coming on to Huawei, in terms of, how, their tentacles have now been embedded into the UK infrastructure, certainly with the digital technology and with 5G, people are concerned, especially now the fact, we are becoming a bit more independent. China is seen as now the sort of, the red dragon, like an enemy now. And if they get maybe any kind of using their technology into our our security services, the last thing we want to be doing is be responsible for giving them any kind of hint as to what our defense or what our what our strategy is on a global front. And then you've got Donald Trump and the link with Boris Johnson as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there?
Well, look, it's as I've said, I'm okay, Jack. Let me put my slippers on. I want to look after myself.
Yeah.
And I think what you're now seeing is unprecedented levels of discoordination where people aren't coordinating. And of course, what Trump's trying to do is trying to rally all the Western.
Yeah.
So it's almost we have a Cold War, an economic Cold War between America and China. And Russia has been supplanted by China because China is now using its economic force to go, as you said, loggerheads. And it'll be interesting what will happen after the election, because if Trump loses, it'll be interesting what the Democrats do. But my guess is the Democrats will also think that security comes first. I remember the UK did go out on a limb and say to the Australians, the New Zealand, Americans, look, we think they're fine. We'll let them have, I think, 35% of penetration, but not beyond that. But I think the Hong Kong scenario, and I think the virus and the whole thing that came out of that, I think changed that. But I think the final straw was Mr. Trump just leaning on the shoulder and saying, this is my economic power, you have to follow me.
So when you are, someone in business as well, sit on various boards, and with, what's happening internationally, it's not necessarily who's right or wrong or what's people's national interest is keeping those alliances, with America, with Australia, New Zealand, with Germany, all intact, because these are your partners have always been there through bad times and good times, and especially now if UK is coming out of Europe at the end of this year, if things go according to the scheduled plan. UK is vulnerable in the sense that it needs to sign up to treaties and to business tariffs with various countries, and USA, with being such a big market, and if Donald Trump does win, how should we say unpredictable he is, and you need to keep him on side. Is there an element of that as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So obviously, anybody who's in business, you now have to accept that part of your risk understanding of your business is the politics. And you have to understand the politics, and you have to predict, which is very difficult, to predict what the politicians are going to do. And if you're a transnational or a multinational that operates in a lot of territories, then part of your thinking should be. Now, you might say, well, look, listen, I run a little shop, why should it bother me? Well, it might bother you because if some of your products are coming from China, you may not be having those products to sell. If we then start producing or importing products from other countries which become more expensive, then suddenly your inflation goes up, your imported prices go up, and then suddenly everybody at home starts to feel the pinch. And really, it is all about economics. We all like our cheap products. We all like our products that are pretty well made, cheap, and the consumer's been driving that, and of course the Chinese have been let loose, and they've done brilliantly well. And now they are very innovative themselves. And the classic example is Huawei, who are streets ahead of everybody else. How will it damage us? Well, the government admitted that it could be up to £2 billion, and it might, those are things we spoke about in the first half, that all those advancements might be delayed by a year. But
2 years,
1 or 2 years, well, listen, I I don't
Yeah.
think anybody does.
No,
I don't think
prediction,
anybody
we've been told.
does. And even with the
roughly
2 billion, we don't know what that really means and how it means. All we know is that Ericsson and Nokia and all the other people, Vodafone, are saying, well, actually, we're pretty well embedded. So I think international trade will change. I think politics will change. I think how people operate economically will change depending on their power.
Sure.
But we have a new Cold War. It's not with Russia, it's with China, and it's based on economics and business. And you know something, in a period of uncertainty, what we really should have is global cooperation.
Absolutely.
And not what we're seeing at the moment.
I think with so much, uncertainty, with the whole upheaval with COVID as well, and the whole, economic situation going for a downturn, it's quite surprising that how we are looking after our own self-interest and looking inwardly and sort of, severing ties with actually, economic powerhouses like, China. We are to recover, alliance with Europe, with America, and with China and Russia should be stronger than ever, but it's not. We've now got, up to 2027 for Huawei to come out of our infrastructure. And then, if I can, what's frustrating for me is the fact that, the politicians are out there and saying that one of the reasons why we are cancelling the contract with Huawei is because of Chinese human records, and they cite the Uyghur Muslims, and what they're doing in terms of concentration camps, and they're trying to do a genocide and ethnic cleansing. But my argument is that they've been doing this for the last 10 years. It's nothing new. Okay, it didn't hit the headlines, but those people are in the know, knew about this, but they chose not to raise awareness on it. But all of a sudden now we're trying to justify why we're moving away from China or making these guys seem as the devil, we are now sort of putting our ducks in a row, saying the following reason: Hong Kong, the origins of COVID, and now the Uyghur Muslims and the human rights issue are the reasons why we're moving away from them. I said, look, please, do it on reasons that are legitimate and that we are going to be taken back by. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, look. Look, China has to now decide and sit back and ask itself what its next steps are. Trump's made it clear what his steps are. His steps are, I'm at war with you, economic terms. And he's done that because he wants to win the next election. So his agenda's pretty close, pretty easy. The Chinese now have to sit back and ask themselves, well, how important is global trade to us? What are we willing to trade in to maintain those relationships? So they suddenly have to think like that. Are we maybe we can't flex our muscles as much as we'd like to, because now actually we can see the world sort of joining together, to combat us. Business globally wants China and China and America to work, because then global trade is good. We need free trade around the world. That's looking highly unlikely. So I think there's a lot of moving around, and I suppose in some respects it's how will China react both to Trump, to the UK, and we'll probably be waiting now for the response from Germany, because that will then send a signal to the EU. And if the EU fall behind America and the UK, China's got a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Then the other problem is that economies that are relied on China, they've now got to ask themselves, well, going forward, where do those products come from? And you might get a reversion of the deindustrialization, and you might get an industrial strategy by the UK government which says, actually, we want to promote telecommunications, we want to manufacture our own infrastructure, and you might get that, which means then they need the labour force to be trained up to do all that. So now there's some long-term thinking required here, because we're in a new world where digital, with the COVID, has changed the way we live, the way we work, and the way we do leisure.
Two last points before we come to the end, Ninder. It's been a fantastic show, really been one of the best shows actually, especially when you're talking about current affairs and international politics. I really get excited about that. Two things, if I may. First of all, I think what's happening now. Do you think this now presents a opportunity for some other countries or other companies to maybe fill the void with Chinese being sort of squeezed out digitally, and the manufacturing powerhouse that there is, and also, you know, with your position as a 5G board, you know, have you had any contacts with Huawei or conversations with the Chinese at all, and what are they like, you know, in terms of you're dealing with on a business capacity?
Okay, so now let's look at opportunities.
Yeah.
We're now going into a post-Brexit era. So I tell you who's excited about what's happening. The Indians are highly excited.
I can imagine, yeah.
Because they're thinking, well, hold on, if this economic distrust continues, there may be an opportunity for us to get into that gap. So suddenly India's flexing. India didn't hang around banning TikTok and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And amazingly, now, you know, the Americans are thinking of banning TikTok as well. TikTok got pulled out in terms of investment in this country. So everybody's at it. So the opportunities now lay for two reasons. So there's other countries that may jump into that place, like India. There's an opportunity for this country and other countries to what we call reshore, which is bring your manufacturing back here.
Sure.
And then start producing goods here. We're going into a digital world, so there's an opportunity to train our next generation, who, by the way, are brilliant at digital anyway, and get them trained up for the new economy of tomorrow. So I think there are many opportunities. Churchill said, where there's a crisis, there's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And it really does depend what you think that opportunity looks like. Do you have the resources and the forward thinking to plan for that new paradigm? So COVID isn't the only thing that's changed. Global economics, global politics has changed, and the world is unrecognizable from a year ago. Well, everybody's not. So I think there will be opportunities, and the sharp-eyed entrepreneurs will see those gaps. And there's people popping up all over the place doing PPE and screens and things, because they see that perhaps this is where the future lies.
Just that sort of point about, you know, any contact with sort of the Huawei or with the Chinese, how are they sort of, you know, are they sort of quite accommodating, or are they just...
I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. We're looking at the policy side and rolling it out. So we tend to work with the Vodafones and people like that, who would then have the contact with the Huawei. We don't have to actually go directly. But we understand the overall political picture.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Ninder. So, guys, what a mammoth Awaaz show. Really, like I said, I'm absolutely buzzing because, like I said, this is my, you know, oxygen. This is, so I love talking about, you know, international current affairs and, you know, where everything sort of plays out, really. So Ninder's really, you know, I think we were sort of jostling, and I quite enjoyed that. So we're at the end of the show. I hope you find it useful. I hope we've gone to a long way to dispel some of those myths that were out there around 5G and, you know, what people were fearful of with regards to cancer, the environmental effects, as well as the physical and the health risks that may be associated with 5G. That was completely dispelled. I'm now going to ask Ninder just to give a parting remark, really, you know, your sort of conclusion, your summary remarks in about 30 seconds, just for our viewers that may have just dialed in.
The future does look bright. We have some fantastic talent in this country.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to excel. We spoke about that. Despite your background, where you're from and what you do. And I think we live in a new world that's full of opportunities. And I think those who are can take that gamble, who are able to take that risk, are able to see the big picture. And I always think big picture.
Yeah.
And never stop learning, because tomorrow you can always learn something new.
That was the celebrity, the local celebrity that is Ninder, who has really had a lot of context with this, and, you know, if and what I want to do is, you know, if someone like Ninder with his, you know, distinct Sikh physical presence, if he's able to make such a good impact on a regional level with his various positions in boards, then we all can. So very inspiring in terms of the work that you do, and the fact that you were able to shed a bit of light in terms of 5G as well. I think thank you for that. So I hope you've enjoyed it. In terms of my schedule for the next 2 weeks, I know since lockdown, this show, Community Wellbeing, has centered this show around COVID and what we can do to protect ourselves. But over the next week, we have a Liaquat Loan who's going to be talking about the first anniversary of the revocation of Article 35 and 370 from last year's Maqbooza Kashmir. We're going to sort of talk about that next week. And then we got Khurshid Ahmed from Dudley, who's also going to talk about the long-standing issue as well. So just something different for a change. So please look after yourselves and each other. Until next week, God bless. Thank you, everyone. Take care.